Welcome, everyone. I'm Terri Alpert, a longtime supporter of both the Academy for Jewish Religion and Americans for Ben-Gurion University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our first ever joint event. Given the turnout of over 400 people, this topic is clearly resonating with you. Some of you may be familiar with one organization or the other, but I bet almost no one here is familiar with both. So allow me to give you a quick introduction to each.
The Academy for Jewish Religion plays a critically important role in the American religious landscape because not only do they train leaders for the Jewish community, they train leaders who embody and live into precisely the kind of pluralism which we need now more than perhaps any time in any of our lives.
AJR exposes its students to a variety of perspectives. This prepares them better to interact with the diverse Jews of their future communities. In addition, rabbis and cantors study with each other at AJR and learn the professional challenges of each other so that they interact as clergy in the synagogue in a much smoother way.
The value of AJR is so clear because in our very partisan time, having people come together to be trained as rabbis who come from different denominational backgrounds, different ideological perspectives, and to learn together is really the wave of the future.
Shalom, my name is Rabbi Rebecca Serbiu, and as the Director of Rabbis Without Borders at Kalal, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with many AJR students and rabbis, and I was incredibly impressed with their deep commitment to bring pluralism and spirituality and be willing to serve every aspect of the Jewish community.
Pioneers in offering pluralistic education and flexible part-time options for those called to these roles, AJR has been a shining light as we all strive to train inspired leaders who have the passion, learning, and commitment to meet the varied needs of the Jewish community.
As you just saw, the Academy for Jewish Religion is a pluralistic seminary that has been ordaining rabbis and cantors for all Jewish communities since 1956. It is especially welcoming to students with considerably more life experience than those at other seminaries, people who have already had one or more successful careers as lawyers, scientists, journalists, and more. And it is because of AJR that I became acquainted with Ben-Gurion University. In 2006, I traveled with my husband, whom you'll meet in just a few minutes, who was then a student at the Academy following a career in business. And we were on AJR's study mission to Israel. When we went to Sde Boker in the Negev, we visited the little cottage where David Ben-Gurion spent his retirement years after leaving government service. Recognizing that the desert is 60% of Israel's total land mass, but barely inhabited, David Ben-Gurion said, "We have to make the desert bloom. And to do so, we need to create an Oxford University right here." Today, BGU is Israel's fastest growing research university. It is one of the only that provides students with an American-style residential experience, and it is also the only one with a mandate to develop a region. Today, we call it the Stanford University of the Desert because of all the remarkable innovative technologies that are born there and the world-changing startup companies founded by its graduates and faculty. Now, I'll turn this over to Bruce and Simon, and all of us get to eavesdrop on this philosophical conversation between a rabbi and a scientist. There should be time for questions at the end, so please feel free to submit your questions in the chat as the program, as we listen to the dialogue. Thank you very much. And Bruce?
Simon, you wanted to open with a few words about BIDR?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank both Rabbi Bruce and Terri and Americans for BGU and the Academy for Jewish Religion for inviting me. I have to say, over the last few weeks, I've had an absolute blast having hours of conversations with Bruce about this topic of Judaism and religion. It's been wonderful. So to tell you a little bit about where I'm from, and I'm not talking about in relation to this terrible British accent I have. I made Aliyah from Britain. I'm from the Jacob Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research, which is part of Ben-Gurion University, and we're on the Sde Boker campus, which is overlooking, if you look at my background, the spectacular wilderness of Zin. So I'm sure many of you know that wilderness of Zin is in the Torah. It's a place where Moshe Rabbeinu and children of Israel wandered. It's the place where God told Moses to speak to the rock so that water came out, and instead he hit it with the staff twice and therefore was not allowed into the land of Israel. This isn't the actual place, but it's named after the place. So it's also where Ben-Gurion is buried. The Jacob Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research is actually split into 3 different institutes. It comprises the Zuckerberg Institute for Water Research, not Mark Zuckerberg, if any of you are thinking about that. And this deals with technologies or topics such as desalination technology, water pollution and early warning systems for water pollution, and wastewater management. We have the French Associates Institute for Agriculture and Biotechnology, where I work, where most of the university's plant sciences are concentrated, both at the agricultural side and the more molecular genetics side. We also have algae biotechnology and fish biotechnology. And last but by no means least, we have the Swiss Institute for Dryland Environmental and Energy Research, which is sort of a conglomeration of desert ecology, climatology, environmental physics, and a big center for solar energy. The last thing I'll say is something that's very integral to the institutes is the Albert Katz International School for Desert Studies, which gives master's degrees, doctorate degrees, and we also have postdoctoral fellows. We have about 50% Israeli students and 50% students from all over the world, including from our neighbors, our Arab neighbors, and also in the wake of the Abraham Accords, we now have our first Moroccan student as well. And last year, we were really, really happy to have Bruce and Terri and their congregation from the Bet Israel Shul. We had a great time with them. So with that, I will pass the proceedings over to Bruce.
Thank you, Simon, and good evening. And good evening to you. Good for those of you who are with us here with me in the Eastern time zone, good afternoon. For those of you who are to the west of us, good morning. It's wonderful to be here. It is wonderful to have a chance to share with you the conversations that Simon and I have been having, sort of distilled into what we hope is an engaging half hour or so. For me, this discussion that we're having really began back last fall when I was writing a sermon for the high holidays for my congregation. And I was doing something that I think a lot of rabbis do in these sermons, that is to say, I wanted to talk to the congregation about the various challenges that we had and how we can overcome those challenges. And those challenges are not uncommon to many congregations: boosting attendance at services and at programming, developing a new generation of leadership for the congregation, growing our Hebrew school, bringing another generation in. And as I was thinking about all of these problems, every one of them had the same solution. And the same solution was more people. People were the solution to every problem that we were facing. And as I thought about that, my mind flipped back to 2015, which was the first time that my family and I traveled to Sde Boker to visit the BGU campus. and see what was going on. And we spent a day there talking to the professors, talking to the students from all over the world, seeing the research. And it was just amazing. It was the amount of innovation, the amount of original thinking that is going on in the walls of this school just are really astonishing. I was so astonished that on the drive back to Jerusalem, I wound up calling my father-in-law, Dr. Gordon Cohen, Alav Hashalom, whom I love dearly, a brilliant, brilliant man. And I was describing for him all of the things that I'd seen. And he said something to me that really just stuck with me. He said that Israelis understand that the one indispensable natural resource is people. And when he said that, I said, that's just a profound thought. And immediately I thought to myself, is there a hook from Torah to that? And my mind immediately turned to Genesis 1, Pru Revu Umilu et haaretz, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the land. But then when I turned to my Tanakh, I realized that I was cutting off that verse at what I think is an inopportune moment. The verse actually says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the land, and master it. So the question then is, what does master it mean? And you turn, of course, to the rabbinical commentaries to see where the rabbis go with this, and they go in all different places. But the interpretation that really stuck with me was that of Ovadia Sforno, 16th century rabbi from Bologna. And he said that master it does not mean master it with our bodies, with our strength, with our physical might. It means master it with the one thing that humans have that set them apart from all of creation. Master it with your minds. Now take that idea, fast forward to our present time, and there's a passage or a quotation from a Rabbi Nachman Amsel. Rabbi Amsel is a noted author and teacher. He wrote a book entitled The Encyclopedia of Jewish Values. And he interprets this verse to mean, the meaning of master it, to mean we are commanded to be scientists. And so with that, I want to ask Simon, a noted scientist, someone who is deeply involved in developing the Negev and all the charge of BGU. Or you feel like in all of that you're doing, that you're fulfilling a commandment by being a scientist, Simon?
So when I think about what you were just saying and about this idea of mastery, I think we need to think really about that meaning of what it means to subdue or master, because that could also have sort of some dark connotations. And I don't think that it means we have carte blanche, to do whatever we want. If I remember correctly, and I'm sure you know much better than I do, Bruce, that when God put Adam into the Garden of Eden, he commanded him to tend and keep the Garden of Eden, which to me doesn't sound like he wanted us to just exploit his creation, but sort of rather mellow this idea of subdue and master. So I would say that to me, mastering the earth means to gain knowledge of it so that you can use the earth, but also to tend and keep it. And gaining the knowledge of earth to me means investigating how it works, which is exactly what science seeks to do. So yeah, I think mastery sort of does mean we need to be scientists, or at the very least be interested and aware of what is going on scientifically, particularly when the balance is being pushed towards this other meaning of master or subdue, which could be exploitation and destruction. Although I think people are becoming much more clued up to the problems, the scientific problems that we're facing, be it population growth or climate change or food security or pollution, clean energy, exactly the sort of research that we are doing at the Jacob Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research, or the technological answers that we are developing at the Institutes for Desert Research. Actually, we're even trying to master other planets. We just had a project. Accepted on Bereshit 2 spaceship to grow plants on the moon, for instance. So, if you like, I suppose we're doing this because we need to sort of maybe master other planets as well, because in the end, our resources on Earth are finite. Just to give you an idea of that, if I take the element phosphorus, okay, phosphorus is one of the 3 major elements in fertilizers which we have to use to grow our crops. And it's estimated, I think, that the phosphorus mines will run out in the next 50 to 100 years. So we need to maybe master other planets as well in order to, because our resources are finite. I suppose I've given you an answer that's very much a scientist point of view, but I want to ask you, as a rabbi, how do you see the mastering of the earth?
Well, I mean, I think that your answer really feeds into my answer. I mean, I think that you've raised issues that, issues of population growth, issues of food security, issues of resource depletion, and all of these, raise the question of how is it we continue to thrive and survive in what we've been given. And I want to, at this point, I mentioned Rabbi Amsel before, and I want to go back a generation now. I want to go back to Rabbi Amsel's teacher, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. And Rabbi Soloveitchik gave a lecture right at the moment of the Suez Crisis in 1956. And he was talking in this lecture about the need for American Jews, and especially, to be at the side of their Israeli brothers and sisters. But he made a point about the nature of Judaism that I think I want to quote to you in a little bit of detail. This is what he said. He said, according to Judaism, man's mission in this world is to turn fate into destiny, an existence that is passive and influenced into an existence that is active and influential, an existence of compulsion, perplexity, and speechlessness into an existence full of will, vision, and initiative. The blessing of the Holy One to his creation fully defines man's role. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and master it. If you do not master it, it will enslave you. Destiny bestows on man a new status in God's world. It bestows upon man a royal crown, and thus he becomes God's partner in the work of creation. Now, I just think that that's a remarkable statement. And as I look at it, there are 2 wonderful ideas in that are intimately entwined together, but I think we can look at separately. One is the idea of fate versus destiny, and the other one is the idea of human beings being God's partners in creation. And I want to look at those. Let me start with this issue of being partners in creation, because I think this is a very, very Jewish idea. And I mention that because we here in the United States live in a country that is really dominated by a Christian ethos. And I think that the Christian ethos may well be the reason why in the United States there is so much tension between science and religion. And I'll just make a couple of points about this, and I'm going to try and do it very carefully because I am no expert on Christianity or Christian faith, so I don't want to go too far beyond my mark here. But let me make a couple of comments that I think are about Christianity. One is that I think Christianity is much more of a faith-based religion than Judaism is. It is more receptive to the transmission of knowledge through authority than Judaism, which is always in the process of questioning knowledge and questioning authority. And the other point I would say is that it seems to me that the Christian theology, folks are willing to suspend that desire to question in order to come to terms with the theology as it plays out. And the other point I'd make about Christianity is that Christianity, I think, is a much more individual-centered faith than Judaism is. It seems to me that the rewards of Christianity play out in issues like personal salvation, whereas in Judaism, it is about a community living in covenant. So I think all of that means that Christianity is more attuned towards keeping science in its lane and keeping religion in its lane. And I don't think that Judaism is comfortable with that. I don't think we're comfortable with the idea of not being able to integrate our knowledge. This is something I would have said before you and I started talking, Simon. But since we have been talking, I have had this sense that, when I refer to the tension between religion and science, that's not something that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis over there in Israel. And is that a fair assessment of things?
You mean whether there's a tension between religion and science or Judaism and science here in Israel?
I'll take it broadly, religion and science, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have to think about perception and reality. So I remember that there was a survey, I think it was maybe 2015, 14, something like that, I think by the Pew Research Center. And they found something really interesting. They found that most secular Jews say that there is a conflict between religion and science, whereas most ultra-Orthodox and religious Zionists said there's no tension or conflict between religious and science. So it was really interesting that less religious people seem to be more likely to perceive religion to be in conflict with science. So that's like a sort of perception. If we come to reality, and I'll stop for a moment and just briefly say something about the ultra-Orthodox community, because they're really a special case in themselves. The reason they may have said that there's no conflict between religion and science is because science is absolutely not part of their curriculum, their study curriculum, their world. Although on the other hand, from what I've read of Haredi thought, they consider Judaism to be the true and big wisdom, whereas science is part of the small wisdoms. So that does suggest they do have a certain appreciation of science, although I would say they mostly engage with it via their use of scientific technologies, whether it's medical technologies or whatever else they allow their congregants or their members to use. So if we put the ultra-Orthodox aside for a moment, let's say we focus on the religious Zionists who are more akin to modern Orthodox. I have never felt any conflict with them between religion, at least in Judaism. I'm not talking about Islam, in Judaism and science. You see religious Zionists as scientists everywhere. You see them in academia, you see them in industry, in high tech. Actually, you even see Haredim, a lot of Haredim in high tech nowadays. The other thing that's really interesting is that in Israel, you see continuous reports almost every day on the news. There'll be some report of some Israeli breakthrough, some Israeli invention, whether it's on the news, the pre-news programs, the standalone programs. And it's almost as if it's treated like this Zionist, patriotic Zionist pride thing, that Israelis have done this breakthrough and that breakthrough. Actually, it reminds me of when we were on sabbatical in Britain in 2011. It was before the Olympics. And my wife was watching TV and she came over and she commented to me, she said, you know, the British, their ideal career for their children, I'm talking about non-Jews here, is sport, okay? Is to be an Olympian, to be an athlete. It seems to me that's their real idea of the ideal career. Whereas in Israel, and maybe it's because Jews aren't so great at sports, I don't know, but in Israel, you don't find that. You find there's a real appreciation for science. So no, I don't feel that I see, at least with the religious Zionists, a particular tension between science and religion.
So this idea of a partnership, the human beings are God's partners in creation, seems like a Jewish idea to you. I would
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's turn to this other idea in Rabbi Soloveitchik's piece. This idea about fate versus destiny, and I know you have some thoughts about that and how that plays out in one's Israeli identity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, when you first read me this quote and you said those words, turning fate into destiny, it completely took me back to when I first became a Zionist when I was like 15 years old. And that feeling of that Zionism was sort of the ultimate turning of fate into destiny. But then during our conversations, it got me thinking of the fact that it actually wasn't the religious who took up practical Zionism and started building the early state. Although Rav Abraham Isaac Kook, the country's first Ashkenazi rabbi and the very famous leader of religious Zionism, because at the time religious didn't accept Zionism. He said that secular Jews building the state of Israel, they were doing God's work even if they didn't know about it. There was no space in which God was not present. But it made me think about this idea that it was actually secular Jews who came out and took up these practical demands of Zionism. And we're talking about, really sacrificing themselves, uprooting themselves from the shtetl, coming to this desolate, malaria-filled backwater of the Ottoman Empire. And it made me think maybe that it really required a more secular outlook on life, rather than this sort of more ethereal world into which purely religious Judaism had led us into this idea that was our fate, to be a minority with anti-Semitism and persecution, and it was necessary for people to be secular in order, or have a secular outlook, to build the state of Israel. So my question actually to you, Bruce, is: do you think secular Zionism was necessary to correct, I don't know, what you like, of the excesses of a purely religious life?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, excesses is an interesting word, because when you think about the Jews of the Pale of Settlement, the Jews of the shtetl, you don't really think about excess. You think about getting by in a very politically hostile environment, but a place where folks were fundamentally politically powerless. I do think, though, that you're raising this issue about Zionism as a corrective, and the corrective, in essence, getting you back to what Rabbi Soloveitchik said. I mean, I think you could look at Rabbi Soloveitchik's view and say the Jews of the Pale of Settlement were the Jews of fate, and the Zionists are the Jews of destiny. I think then the issue really is, if we are intended, as Rabbi Soloveitchik says, to be God's partners in creation, well, we have to be engaged in creating. We have to have the power and the resources to do that. And I think that maybe you can say that Zionism, that's the great corrective of Zionism, is to empower Jews to once again be God's partners in creation. I want to, though, take this conversation just another step, though, and there's a passage in Deuteronomy that I want to talk about for a second. It's one that has intrigued me for quite some time. It's from Deuteronomy 11, and it's about Moses describing the land to the Israelites, and he says to them that this land that you are about to inherit, it's not like the land of Egypt. It's not like the land where you water the ground with your foot, which I assume is referring to irrigation, like a vegetable garden. It says, he says, no, the land, it's a land of hills and valleys, and it drinks up the water of heaven. And then the passage goes on to say that the eyes of God are on this land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And, this passage, by the way, these are the verses that precede the second paragraph of the Shema, which talks about if you do the commandments, you're going to prosper, and if you don't do the commandments, you're going to find yourself off of this land. So this is a notion that is throughout the Torah. That yes, this is a land of a land flowing with milk and honey, but if you fail to live in covenant, then the spigots are going to be turned off. And I'm wondering how you understand that. What is it about this particular piece of land that is actually poor in natural resources, that God would set a covenanted people to live in it and to live in covenant there, as opposed to a place where you can just water the ground with your foot?
So I think that being in a land of no resources actually spurs creativity, spurs your partnership with God in creation. I think Shimon Peres said, once said that there are oily countries and there are holy countries. Okay, the oily ones being the ones full of natural resources, and the holy ones being full of human resources, us. And when I think of a land of no resources, it makes me think of living in stress, because I'm a plant scientist, right? And it makes me think of one of the big paradigms of plant science. So plants are what is known as sessile organisms. They can't move. It means they can't move. They have to deal with anything that comes that way, whether it's some insects trying to eat them, pathogens attacking them, high temperatures, freezing temperature, doesn't matter what. They have to deal with it. And so plants have developed absolutely unique mechanisms, unique to any other type of organisms, to deal with this idea of stress. And it makes me think that maybe the fact that Israel lives in a land of no resources and lives under stress all the time has spurred our creativity. So let's think of say water tech. Okay, we live in a land with very little water resources. And if you think over the years of all the technological and creative technologies that have come out of Israel. So first of all, in the 60s, they started with the national water carrier, which brought water from the Kinneret down to the Negev, so they could irrigate and have agriculture there. Then you can move into drip irrigation, an Israeli invention which is used all over the world, specifically because we have no water, we want agriculture, and we need to use water in the most efficient way possible. To the last few years, where Israel now has desalination technology, 5 desalination stations, and we've actually become quite a water-rich country. So I think that this idea of stress, living in no resources, has spurred our creativity. But I think it's also spurred something else, and that is a particular Israeli culture of living under stress that has helped science. I think it does have some roots in Judaism as well, which I'll say something later. So one part of Israeli culture is that Israelis tend to take on scientific developments really, really quickly. They apply them very, very quickly. I think one of the great examples of this is, again, agriculture. So if you think of the early Zionists who came to settle the land and farm the land, they were mostly, like most Jews in the diaspora were urban dwelling. They were not farmers, and so they didn't have this generations of their family telling them how to farm and this is the way to do it. They came to Israel, they didn't know how to do it. They had to do it ad lib and ad hoc and improvise. And as soon as any scientific breakthrough came in agriculture, they were super quick to take it on in order to survive and be able to farm here. The other thing about Israeli culture, I think that stress has really sort of driven, is this non-hierarchy that you find in Israel, right? If anybody's read Startup Nation, they talk a lot about this non-hierarchy, which has really spurred on creation in Israel. Just to give you an idea of how non-hierarchical Israel is, I'll tell you just a quick personal story. Before I made Aliyah, I was the director of the British Aliyah movement in Britain, and I was part of the Jewish agency there. And every year we would put on this thing called a tachlis day, a practical day, where we would invite shippers and people in education and jobs, the practical things you need to do when you make Aliyah. And every year the Prime Minister of Israel would send a fax, a greeting to all the participants. And this year the Prime Minister in that time was, excuse me, was Yitzhak Shamir, hadn't sent anything. So 2 days before this event, my boss at the Jewish agency says to me, could you please call the Prime Minister's office and ask the Prime Minister to send a fax? So I'm like, I'm used to being in Britain. Nobody phones up the Prime Minister's office and asks the Prime Minister to send a fax, right? So I thought, okay. So I called this number and I spoke to somebody in the Prime Minister's office and asked them if the Prime Minister could send a fax. And he said to me, I'm really, really sorry. He said, the Prime Minister's gone home. So first of all, I was blown away that they would even tell me where he is. And then he says to me, I said to him, well, it's no problem, I'll call tomorrow. He says, no, I'll give you his home phone number. So I was like, what? Okay. So he gives me the Prime Minister's home phone number. I phone the Prime Minister's house and this woman answers. And I said to her, are you the Prime Minister's secretary? He says, no, this is his wife, Shulamit. So I'm like, okay, can you ask? I mean, it was a complete, talking about non-hierarchical. So it's very non-hierarchical society. And I think that really does spur creativity. In fact, again, if you've ever read the Startup Nation, they tell the story of the fact that there's Intel branch in Israel, and Israel obviously is an American company. And when middle management from Intel have their first trip to Israel, where they're going to meet people from Intel here, they have this cross-cultural seminar to prepare them from an Israeli meeting so they don't freak out when some 25-year-old who's just left the army says to the boss, you're wrong, I've got a much better idea. So I think this hierarchy really spurs on creativity, because you're not frightened to challenge authority and to say to your supervisor, your scientific supervisor, your idea is wrong, maybe there's a better idea. I said to you just a minute ago that I think that actually that non-hierarchy actually might come from Jewish tradition as well, because first of all we have the Jewish Chevruta, right, where a student will sit with the rabbi and will challenge the rabbinic authority that's sitting in front of him over some text in a page of Gemara or something. Actually, think of it, maybe even has its roots further back in the Torah, where you have Abraham bargaining, challenging God, right, not to kill the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? He says to them, well, if I can find 50 righteous people, will you spare everybody? If I can find 10, it actually, I mean, that's the most non-hierarchical that you can possibly get. Actually, maybe our name, Israel, right? I mean, Israel doesn't mean a people who believe in God or a people who submit to God. It means a people who struggle with God, right? Who are actual partners in creation with God. So yeah, so I think that this land that we're in, no resources, stress, spurs us to be a partner in creation.
Thank you, and thank you for your little. I loved your little peroration there. I mean, I think that you're showing me that scratch an Israeli scientist and you'll find a rabbi. Underneath.
I'm not sure about that.
No, I can tell you it's not. It doesn't work in reverse. That's I'm afraid is true. But it is. You know, I loved hearing the stories, and I think it's true of American Jewry. You know, perhaps in its way to a less dramatic effect. The Jews in America have been extraordinarily creative in all ventures, including discovering new territories and new fields to conquer when they were blocked out of existing fields. So I mean,
which is a kind of stress in itself, right?
Absolutely it is a kind of stress, but it also, you know, just to you know, put a little bit of a bow on this, it brings me sort of back to my father-in-law. In his statement about human beings being the indispensable resource, and I think what he was onto was really true. We are the indispensable resource when we are the force that moves fate into destiny, and we do that by being God's partners in creation, which is the crown that Torah gives to us, the crown that Judaism gives to us. So, Simon, thank you for what has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and
same here.
Bruce and Simon, do you have time for a few questions?
Sure.
Sure, we'll go give it a go.
Okay. From Janard Hajini, we have, is drinking water becoming scarce around the world?
Yes, absolutely. Drinking water is becoming more and more scarce, more and more polluted. We have drying up of resources. In fact, you can see even in Europe now, if you look what's been going on in the last summer, you can see the Rhine has been drying up. Cargo ships that have come up the Rhine, or the Danube actually, they've actually had to reduce their cargo because they're touching the bottom of the. So there's a huge problem of water resources and pollution, and even if I just give you an idea of if you think about human waste, right, human poop, if you like, yeah. We make around about 7 million tons of it or something a day. And if you think about that, and just that's mostly gets thrown into rivers and waters in the developing world. And even in the developed world, we're having massive problems with treating sewage, and that's causing pollution. So yeah, we have a massive problem with drinking water all around the world.
This question is from Bill Levinson, and this is for both of you. Could you speak to the intersectionality of climate change and the impact on land use, immigration, and ultimately refugees from the perspective of both rabbis and scientists?
You want to take that one for the moment, Bruce?
The intersectionality. Can you give me that one again, Terry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's 1 second. Let me find it.
So I think it was the intersectionality of climate change, land use, immigration, and refugees, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, I think that you know, there are a number of different different issues that are being raised. I don't know, you know, speak to intersectionality. When you talk about refugees, that is a really fascinating question. It's a fascinating question for us here in the diaspora. Some of us here in the diaspora sort of watching the immigration issues play out in Israel. And some of us, I think, you know, are take a certain amount of pride in the fact that Israelis are actually, in a very thoughtful way, struggling with what immigration crisis actually means. They're struggling against, you know, conflicting Jewish values, you know, the values of welcoming the stranger, and you know, at the same token, the responsibility to the Jewish world as a Jewish state. You know, so that's you know, a big issue. I mean, I think that you know, I think that Judaism has between its openness to scientific change and development and its grounding in a morality that is based on life, it really does give us the tools to deal with these conflicting challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a scientific point of view, there's an absolute intersectionality between climate change, land use, and refugees. I mean, climate change is causing the movement of people. I mean, if there's going to be less water around, climate change causing crop failures, it's going to cause mass movement of refugees. And so that's something that the world is definitely going to have to deal with and is dealing with. So if we can develop technologies that can mitigate that, then we'll be able to mitigate as well, maybe allow people to stay where they are and to have a good life where they are, to grow crops where they are, to try and mitigate some of these problems of climate change.
Okay, I have a few more questions for you, and anyone who is thinking of a question, the way you ask it is by putting it into the Q&A, and we'll do as many as we can. Jack Schlachter asks, when J. Robert Oppenheimer set up the Los Alamos lab to lead the R&D effort of the Manhattan Project, he insisted that it be non-hierarchical. Do you think he had absorbed that from his Jewish culture, despite being brought up in a secular setting?
Well, I don't know enough about Robert Oppenheimer's Jewish upbringing. It's quite possible in sort of in a Jewish environment where education is so important and this challenging authority, it could be. It reminds me, although it does remind me, and again, when I was on sabbatical in Britain, I was sitting having a discussion with the scientists I was working with the postdocs and with the students. And suddenly it came to lunch. And we all got up and the faculty and myself went into they dragged me into the faculty lounge to have lunch. And the postdocs all went into the postdoc lounge to have lunch. And the students went into the student cafeteria. And I'm thinking to me, in Israel, that would never, ever happen. We would all go together to lunch and carry on the scientific conversation, this non-hierarchy. And I would imagine that Robert Oppenheimer was also harping on this, that if you don't have hierarchy, you can challenge, you can go to lunch together. You don't have this worry about not challenging authority. But whether this was via his Jewish upbringing, I don't know.
I think you can. There is so much that goes into a Jewish character that we just absorb through our childhood, through our background, through our values. That sometimes we don't know where that is. Where that is where these influences are coming from. I would also point out, though, of course, the Manhattan Project was a military project. And it was taking place at a time when there was we were at war, and the demands of the military on Oppenheimer were significant. And I think that whatever his desire to treat the Manhattan Project as a scientific exercise, I think there were also responsibly curbed by the needs of military secrecy and military discipline. So,
okay, Simon, a question for you. You mentioned desalination plants. Is Israel presently producing more fresh water than it is using?
Yes, it is using more fresh water than it is using. And we are actually probably yes and no. Many of the desalination plants are actually towards the middle to the south of the country, and which you would expect, right? Because that's where it's the driest. But actually, because the south of the country, because of desalination, has become so water rich, the north of the country has been drying out. So now they're going to have to build a desalination plant in the south. But yeah, in principle, we are producing more water, and we can even begin thinking of exporting water. We do export water to Jordan. They take a certain amount of water from the Kinneret every year as part of the 1993 agreements, was it? 2 agreements with Jordan, 4 agreements, 1994 agreements with a peace agreement with Jordan. But that doesn't affect us anymore. We were very worried at that time that them taking this amount of water from the Kinneret would be a problem, but it doesn't affect us anymore. They can take it, and we're still okay because of desalination.
And a question for both of you. What do you see as the role of, this one is for you, Bruce. What do you see as the role and responsibility of rabbis to help educate people about the importance of science?
That's a very good question. I think if you let's maybe talk about Jews. Let's talk about our congregants. And one of the things that I've been trying to do in my congregation is to make them understand that what we absorb here in the United States is a tension between science and religion is not a Jewish way of looking at it. And I like to point out, I like to pull out, a volume of my Mikraot Gedolot, my rabbinic Bible. And if you look at a page of a rabbinic Bible, there may be 3 or 4 lines of Torah in very large type. And the rest of the spread, that is to say, the rest of that page and all of the facing page, is all commentary in very small type, which is to say that the volume of commentary that we generate for each word is voluminous, which is and that is how we understand the world. That's how we understand Torah. We understand Torah through interpretation. And that level of interpretation is part of what makes us partners with God in creation. So that I just think that Judaism is very, very open to science and scientific discovery. Does not see any seams with it at all. And the important thing for a rabbi to do is get that word out to her or his congregants.
Okay, we've got time for just one last question. David Bachman asks, in discussing the Pew survey, have either of you noticed that religious Jews in Israel are different from religious people in the diaspora?
I don't know. I do remember from this survey that they asked about, although they said that religious Jews said that there was no conflict between religion and science, when they asked specific questions like the loaded question of evolution, that was slightly different. So about 80% of secular people said that they believed in evolution, but only 20% of religious people said they believed in evolution. Most of them believed that we were exactly as we are now. I don't know what that is like in the States, whether that's also a problem. I know there's always a big tension in the United States about creationists versus evolutionists. I did actually once meet a religious person who was teaching evolution in a religious school in Mitzpe Ramon. And his idea was the fact that if you look at the order of what happens in Genesis, that first it's the sea and the fish, and then it's the land mammals, and then it's man, is actually the order of evolution. So But I don't know whether there's a dichotomy between what happens in Israel and what happens in the diaspora.
I don't know the answer to that either. I would just though offer this observation, and that is that the United States has in terms of its Judaism has been extremely innovative. The various streams of Judaism, and it goes beyond Reform, Conservative, and Orthodoxy, to renewal and all different modes of Judaism. The United States has treated, American Jews have treated their Judaism with a tremendous amount of creativity, and a creativity that I think has been unfortunately not developed in Israel as it has in the United States. I think that's going to change. I think Israelis are at a point where they are beginning to look at their Judaism in a more open fashion, and looking at how it can be more open. So I think that's going to be, the innovation that we see in the United States will come to Israel too, and I think that will open things up even further.
Bruce and Simon, thank you for allowing us to all eavesdrop on this conversation. And based on the number of questions we have, I think we could go on for another hour, but I'm afraid I've got to call time. So really, really appreciate both of you being here today. And thank you to all of the supporters of both organizations for joining us for this intellectual debate.
It was our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.